Hello, D. Alfred Ostrowski. In this recording, I'm going to be giving a hands-on tutorial / demonstration of implementing your own Solidity smart contract in the context of a decentralized application or DAPP. I'll be leveraging the React.js framework, and I'll be borrowing my prior installation. If you haven't installed the Node.js and related Ethers.js libraries, I'll point to the earlier video that runs through that installation, and that'll be included in the README install notes associated with the GitHub. This is day 2 of my 20-day challenge, and I'll be cut pasting as usual directly from the README install and following through those instructions, so we can go through this very rapidly and you'll be up and running if you haven't used it prior with your very own installation and execution of a decentralized application or DAPP. Okay, so again, I'm assuming that you've ran through these steps and they're well documented. And as usual, I'm running a C5 instance on the Amazon EC2, and I'm going to backfill the day 0, which has all the preparatory information if you don't have that. And I'll try to backfill as many details to get anyone who is perhaps has hopefully some exposure to software, but is coming into blockchain from completely scratch. Okay, so let's get started. I have 2 terminals up and running. And again, you can use any variation of this. You don't have to use PuTTY like me. You don't have to use VI. I'll include backfill some more instructions for that as well. This works well for me. You might want to use a more sophisticated environment, but we're not playing around with the code. I'm not coding from scratch, okay? We are pulling in pre-made solutions and just getting it up and running and doing some experimentation with it. So let me get started. I got 2 terminals up and running again. And the first thing I'm going to do, and this is from the home Ubuntu directory, and I'm going to call create React app, okay? And I'm going to do one of the directories here, and I'm going to call it hello W and hit return. So the npx as usual. Okay. I'll just do this hello world with lowercase. So it's complaining about the uppercase. That's okay. We'll work around it. So again, the C5 instance is going to serve us well here, quite simply because the installations are going to run a little bit faster. And one thing to note with all the installs, sometimes I have experienced 1 out of 100, 1 out of 200. Sometimes it just won't install from the cloud due to any number of issues. Could be internet latency or perhaps a temporary issue with the cloud. I would encourage you to just keep on trying it, maybe wait a short period of time and you should be up and running. Okay, but again, the purpose of these tutorials are to get you up and running on a common platform and take it wherever you want to go with it. Okay, but in my humble opinion, you're always better off having a working solution as opposed to just reading about it, okay, and going from there. Okay, so this should be up in a second here. I'm not going to pause out because I'm pretty confident it's going to be up and running very quickly here. And again, some of the naming conventions, let's say for the project on the README install is going to have some slight variations, as will the IP. So keep that in mind. So let's go to the directory here, hello world. And you notice here we have a bare bones React.js install. So I'll be preparing other content where I dive deep into React, but here we don't need to do a sophisticated project installation. It's nice to break down all the aspects of React.js, and there's a lot of moving parts with React, okay? Here, first and foremost, we want to get up and running. And we want it to serve its intended purpose here of just being the front end for the blockchain and our Solidity smart contract. So let's get that up and running and build on what we know already with the Hello World. So here I'm going to, I can test my installation just by doing the npm start. And I could even just run it as that. Now, you don't have to if you have a high level of confidence, but I'm just going to run through that real quick. It's not going to take us very long. So it builds its own hello world, and I have my, I can take my DNS here, and I can go to the, it dropped it out here. Let me grab it again, and I'm going to put it in another tab. Now, one thing you have to make sure that so it's up and running, and this is the flash screen, and we're going to completely change the app.js code, but this is a nice stepping stone. Okay, if something doesn't work, you can always back up to this. If you're asking yourself the hard question, hey, is my install of React.js working? It is working, so we can proceed. Okay, and run with it. Okay, so one thing I do want to point out here is with the installation, one thing to double check, which I already did. And again, I'll try to backfill all these steps. Okay, so you have a comprehensive checklist. Okay, if something's not working, you make through, hey, did I miss an instruction? But I don't want to repeat this all the time. Is you want to check your inbound rules, and I have set an inbound rule for IP4 all traffic. Now I'm shotgunning it a little bit here, but hey, just getting us up and running. All right, we can be a little more detailed moving forward. So I'm going to shut down React.js. I'm just going to Control-C out of that directory, and I'm good to go now. So next thing I'm going to do is install Hardhat. So in prior installations, I created a directory, and then I went in it and I installed Hardhat here. I already have a directory created from React.js, and I can easily do the Hardhat installation. But again, you want to make sure that, you know, common error here in this case is that people might run it from a different directory and then wondering why things aren't working. So just take note that I did a create React and app, and then I CD to the project directory that I created. Okay, because it's a simple mistake. I made it myself. You're sitting in another directory knowing, gee, why isn't coming up? So with this, I defaulted all the steps. I don't have to go through ad nauseum. We're going to be doing this over and over. But we're up and running. Okay, everything's fine. So we can go through our checkpoints here. Next thing I want to do, and again, I'm going to be pulling everything here is backed up to this associated GitHub. So the GitHub is there for you, and you can just reference exactly the same fashion. And again, in very short period of time, be up and running. Okay, so next step is to edit the Hardhat config file. Okay, so now that I ran Hardhat, it added some extra files here, among that being Hardhat config. And in this case, I'm just going to blow it away and replace it. Okay, we can play around with the editing or do more fancy operations, but here, let's get it up and running, and we can break it down further as we proceed. So I'm taking the Hardhat config that I have directly from my GitHub, and having blown that away, I can just cut and paste in here. One thing I do have to modify is I have to pull my own DNS. Okay, so anytime you're running, especially with the DAPP, it's going to have, you can have a DNS perhaps in more than one place. Okay, so double check your DNS. If you shut down your EC2 instance, you may end up with a different DNS, or if you have multiple instances, you can easily get confused, which I have in the past, okay, that you are looking at the wrong instance. So make sure you're grabbing the right one, make sure the security rules are set. I'm going to grab that DNS, and I'm going to go back here, and I just cut pasted it in here. Okay, you don't want to hand edit it, you'll make a mistake. And again, it's going to create some confusion for you. So let me go back. And again, I'm just following through directly through the README installer instructions. And again, I'm going to try to add, I'm trying to add a little bit extra notes here. So we have some extra things to consider when you're troubleshooting, or if something doesn't happen to work for whatever reason. So I have a lock.solidity. I don't need it. We're not playing with it. So I'm just going to create the hello.solidity in this fashion. And again, use any editor that you're comfortable with. I use VI because it's always there for me. Okay. And again, as I mentioned a number of times, it's doing what I need to do. If I was creating a sophisticated application, you might want to use Copilot, you might want to use Visual Studio, and I'm not adverse to these, okay? But this is, I want to get you up and running as fast as possible, and this is the way that I'm most comfortable with it. So here, I'm going to pull in my hello world, same thing as before, all right? And I went through this, and we're going to break it down further in more videos. We're going to take a look at assertion testing, and we're going to also look at the transactions that are generated. And we already looked at the blockchain and exactly what's being written, but we're going to break it down further. And there's a lot to unpack here. Of course, looking at the code, it's pretty simplistic. I got a string, and I'm going to do a set get operation on that. Anyone who does programming is already pretty familiar with this, but we have a lot of dynamics behind the scenes with the blockchain, okay, which are really interesting to explore at this level, because you get a more sophisticated application such as DeFi, okay, that already start building on these principles, making the assumption that you understood the mechanics of the blockchain, okay? So in this case, it's nice to take these simple examples. I'm going to concentrate in further videos of breaking it down a lot further and provide a little bit more details. That way, when you start expanding on your knowledge, okay, it's going to make a lot more sense. Okay, so next thing I want to do, we're going to be up in a second here. So the next thing I'm going to do is do two more modifications. I'm going to go to the app.js. We're going to replace that, pull in my code. And you're going to have an appreciation now of exactly what's going on with your interface. And in most cases, a lot of the troubleshooting with smart contracts is not just the contract itself, right? It's with React, this monster that is React, okay, and all the complexity involved, and most importantly, connecting between that. And that's why I started off with the command console in the last video. And you could use that as a step back. Of course, you go to use Remix and these other types of IDEs. I don't favor that. I do use them, but I don't favor it as much because, hey, I'd rather be working with JavaScript because it's JavaScript to JavaScript as opposed to an IDE, which I'm never going to be doing. It's kind of like in similar testing environments where they go straight to device if you're doing Android development and so forth. So here I'm going to go to the app.js. In this case, I'm going to delete that. And I hold just down the D. That's what's handling the delete if you're not familiar. Again, I'll try to put more information on it if you want to use the same exact means that I am using here. So I'm going to pull in my code. I'm just cut pasting from my other screen off screen here. And we're going to break it down. Let's get up and running. And we're going to step through the code as soon as I get it up and running. I made some modifications here that adds in the address and the ABI in an automated fashion via the deploy script. And this is going to allow for, as opposed to a lot of other implementations that I see that can really leave a little bit more means for having common errors occur. Okay, and let's, again, as before, let's get up and running. And the most important thing you need to understand here is that you have to modify the DNS. So you can pull in the code from the GitHub as I just done, following the instructions, and modify the DNS, and that's it. And make sure that you copied in the entire DNS. We're good to go. So the last change here is to modify the deploy script, okay? And that is the last step we need to do to get this up and running. Now, one thing I also want to mention is we run this. I use Google Chrome. It has a little bit nicer means of developers console, okay, to look at it. And I like to do console log as well as other means of troubleshooting. And we're going to go through that in a second here. But let me put in the final step is to go to the deploy, and I'm going to go to scripts. And okay, it doesn't give that to me. So I got to build a scripts directory. That's the step that I had to put in here. And I am going to make your scripts. And then I go to that, I'm going to VI deploy, okay, .js. And once again, I'm just going to simply pull in my deploy script, and this is pretty much good to go. I don't have to modify anything here. And again, let me get this up and running, and then we can break it down a little bit, okay? It's not, again, it's not a lot of value in talking about it if I don't get it up and running appropriately, right? So here I grab the DNS and I go back to my first screen and I do copy that in because I'll make a mistake. My typing's terrible, right? So I can do an npx hardhat node and host name. Now, interesting thing between running the console, okay, the console, you notice I use localhost, but here I'm running as a web app, centralized application, or DAPP, right? And I'm going to be initiating from the browser. So the browser doesn't know what localhost is, right? The browser is my little client. So in this case, when I run that host name, I do need to specify my direct DNS and get that up and running. So it's recognized and associated with the DNS, and it's completely linked to the app.js. So it brings up my personal blockchain, my 20 accounts, and it sits there waiting for engagement, right? Any type of web server. So now I would, the next step here, and again, make sure that I'm in the project directory. Okay, I almost forgot. And I'm going to, whoops, I don't want that. I'm going to pull in the next step here is deploy JS with the npx. So I do npx hardhat run scripts deploy network localhost, and in this case I can get by with the localhost for the deployment because I'm going from the script to the internally in the EC2 instance. And you can see here it deployed in the background, and I have a deployment. It's written to block 1. I got a warning. Okay, I'm always well, a lot of things can happen here. So I printed out the address from the deploy script. Let's get the DAPP up and running and make sure it works. And we'll break down both the app.js and the deploy script, okay, and how it engages with each other. So we have the React.js, and I can just refresh this and get the appropriate output. So it look like it's connecting. Let me just do another, oh, forgot to say the magic word. Okay, I didn't start up React. Okay, so no wonder it's not coming back. So I'll do an npm start. So, and again, you may have multiple projects initiated with React.js, okay? Make sure you're running it from the directory, whatever you named it, okay? So I took note here, I'm running it all under hello world. And with the install before, again, you're going through these projects, you can create new directories to do that, and you don't have to go laboriously through reinstalling it every time. I like to do it every time just so you have the most current. If something's breaking off the cloud, then I can give you the most recent, and hopefully it's going to work for you, okay, per my philosophy approaching this. So do an npm start, and you're going to want to watch it perhaps to some degree. If there's something of great error, it's definitely going to let you know. These warnings, okay, are ever present in the world of React.js, okay, so I wouldn't be too concerned. Looks like a successful completion. I can go back here, and here I have message output, get set, contract interaction, and you may have seen before, I'm going to update that contract. And I can look at my console here, and I did I got a second block generated. Why? Because I wrote to the blockchain, right? It generated that, and we already know how to read directly from that. You can go back through the blockchain, and we're going to go in greater detail, look at the log files, okay, which is a secondary means of storage, and we can also check events, okay. That's another step that we can do to further your understanding of this seemingly simple example, but we want to get the most out of it, because when you get into more sophisticated examples, then you're going to have more of a foundation to work with them, comfort level. So it looked very good with the blockchain. Now you can do a get, and it updated it, and I can update this to hello world or anything, right, that I'm interested in. And another operation here is, now that I'm with the I have some console logs that I wrote to developers console, and this is a nice way to test your work. Here I have the hello address of the contract, and we're going to be breaking this down further. We're going to look at assertion testing and identify between address of accounts, address of your blockchain, and when you get into more sophisticated implementation, you're going to have accounts associated with contracts and a whole huge, substantial amount of features that can be added to this. Okay, but this is our starting point, right? And you can see, break it down appropriately. And you see we have the 20 accounts. So all that information, I find it very helpful to dump to the console log, and then I can go from there. So here I'm going to do the update, and you can see here I'm sent some diagnostics, and we can take a look at that, and I can do the get operation, and it came back, and I can do any variation with that. I can update it again, do the update, and you can see that working, and I can grab that. So there you go. We were able to install React.js, install another version of Hardhat within the context of the React.js directory, pull in our smart contract that we've already leveraged from the command line, and we move this into a full-blown decentralized application, and modified the Hardhat config as well. And then I pulled in my app.js code after testing that Hardhat was up and running, and we ran the deployment script, and you see the results right here. So let's break it down, take a look at the code, and we'll be done. Okay. And you can see here the transactions, everything is working appropriately. Now we're also generating events. Okay, I'm going to push that discussion a little bit further down so we can have this in smaller chunks. But let's just take a look at the app.js code and deployment. Let's start with the deployment first and just go through a basic explanation again. I'll be breaking this down further, and it's really a function of starting small, building on what you know, right? Just like with everything else here, right? So here, I took a standard deployment script. I did some slight modifications, okay, to actually copy this into a relevant directory that can be accessed, okay. And so here I have get contract factory. I believe we use this on some level with the within the context of the command line. There's a couple of variations of doing this, but here we grab the contract and we do the deployment, and I assign it to relative constants. Here I have a function invoked that waits for the actual deployment, and we saw this get address that posted the address of that smart contract. So when I have a app.js code for React.js, it needs to read a couple things from the smart contract. It needs the JSON code of the interface, and it also needs the contract address. Okay, so these are two pieces of information that need to be stored appropriately. So here I have the contract address is read from hello get address, which is built into a smart contract and allows me to access the, not surprisingly, the address. And I'm storing this appropriately into a file named hello using safe front-end files. Okay, so I take a contract address and the name, and most importantly, I'm storing it in a place that it can be accessed at, because when it's generating it, it is going to be in an artifact directory in most cases. And in some cases, the app.js cannot just, like any good web application, doesn't have complete access to the server environment in which it operates. So here we're explicitly putting it in an area that can be read from the app.js. And you notice I didn't deploy and then pull out the address and edit my app.js again. Some tutorials and applications do that. Okay, here we kind of foolproof that, and because that's another thing that can go wrong or easily be overlooked. Okay, so here we write it, and we write it as a JSON-based file. Okay, using JSON stringify. Okay, I'm not going to break that down, go in elaborate detail there, but you can have an appreciation. You can look at the associated directories, we'll get an app.js, and find out exactly how it is represented using stringify if you're not familiar with that. Then I grab the contract artifact and I do the artifact sync. And here I do another write, and I'm grabbing that artifact. So we can look at that file specifically, and that is a JSON-based description, kind of like an interface-based description, like basically telling or making it available in JSON key value format. That here we deployed a smart contract and it has a set and a get operation, and these are the names, and this is the variables that are passed in. Okay, and obviously this can get a lot more sophisticated. So I got two pieces of information that are generated by the deployment outside of just doing the mechanics of the deployment. We did that from the command line with a couple lines of code, so I already have an idea of how that does. But this very conveniently also copies in the data that you don't have to edit the app.js, which quite frankly is a little bit more overhead than you're going to want to deal with. So it's nice to have this as a building block of code. And then we have a basic main operation and handles the appropriate error handling. So that's the deployment script in a nutshell. Again, we're going to be doing more deployments, and we're going to be doing more sophisticated operations, especially in the context of using constructors with the smart contracts and have smart contracts invoking other smart contracts and so forth. So let me go to the source, and I'm going to look at app.js. And let's break this down. So those files, and last thing we do is look at the contracts data. You can see the hello JSON. Again, that's my interface-based description, and then just a single address stored in a file. You could reference them sometimes with Truffle. I was referencing it out of a single file. Here, just a little bit easier to break it out. You don't have to be parsing out for special components. Okay, so and here we just do an import on that, and that conveniently reads it in app.js. So again, without really getting extensive into app.js and React in general, okay, we have a class app, and the component will mount. Okay, this is a behind the scenes operation, and here we're calling a module called load blockchain data. Okay, and in this case, it's like pre-initializing all my operations. And here's, you saw before the console log, this is where I'm generating it. I'm generating the address and ABI. And this is a nice way to debug it. Okay, that's why I use Chrome. Okay, because it's a nice way to step through the implementation of the smart contract. We have the Web3 now. If you notice, I'm not using Ethers.js. I have some challenges replacing this directly with Ethers.js. If I get something that is presented as nice as this, I'll update this again, do another update with Ethers.js. Here I'm using Web3 to do the actual behind the scenes connection here. Okay. So next thing I do is grab the accounts, and I read those in. I only need the first account. Now we don't have a wallet here. Okay, so we're really grabbing that first account that was presented, and we're using the money from that because you know that the deployment and ownership of that contract, okay, it has to be supported by an account. And I printed that out here, and again, you could see that I take note of the fact that I clicked that in when I was working through the developer's console. Now I read in the contract, and I take the new hello ABI, and that is taken from my hello JSON. Okay, we'll take a quick look at that before we wrap this up. And then I instantiate the address, and I do a set state that is going to allow for access throughout the application. It's going to enable this to allow for global access. Okay, again, without getting into a lot of the intricacies of React.js, of which there is a ton of complexity, perhaps as just as much with Solidity, if perhaps arguably even more. But again, let's start small and build on our knowledge here. So here I set state with the constructor. Again, this runs in a behind the scenes fashion as well, just as you would with any type of constructor. So I have an event handler here. Okay. Those familiar with web-based programming, okay, use this as a means of understanding what's going on. When I do the click on the button, that's going to be generating an event. And in this case, it does the send, and I'm passing in the associated values, and every step of the way I can go through and test this. And we can also test this, which we will, okay, in the context of a assertion testing. In many cases, it might even serve as a better means of starting, but I wanted to get into the DAPP first and get that up and running, and we can take a step back a little bit and break it down further and have a higher comfort level. But you're going to find all the debugging activities that you may do on a perhaps a slightly manual level are manifested in the assertion testing, which is super crucial for this type of programming. Here, I do a get current val, okay, and this is invoked by the interface where it's doing that get operation. Now, one of the variations here is I have to use this state. Why? It's going to give me the global access to the contract. And between contract and methods, you might be tempted just to put in gate, but you actually have to get, but you have to put in methods get. Okay, that's the syntax that it's looking for. And here, when I set that state, that means, hey, make this accessible to anywhere throughout the application. And then I have your basic HTML, which is in the rendering, which you saw on the screen. So if you have any familiarity with that, then you can match that up or do view source, and this is exactly what you're going to see, right? So here I have a basic form, and I prompt for that input, and I do a submit on that with the button. The button generates the event, and then it click sends up another event to perform the get, okay? And that's pretty much app.js in a nutshell, okay? So the final part here that I want to present is that contracts data, okay? And this is the information that was generated from the deployment, and it's stored in this directory. So just take a quick look at that. This illustrates what I've been talking about, the address. The hello address is just address in JSON-based format, and then the hello JSON has another JSON-based format, but again, we have a lot more information here that you could potentially unpack, okay? And most importantly is the ABI and the interface-based description, okay, of exactly what are all the operations that are being performed here, okay, in the my inputs and outputs and the events, and just a JSON-based characterization of the contract so the app.js can work appropriately. So there you have it, okay, you got your app DAPP initialize up and running with React.js, and hope everything worked okay. So thanks for listening. See you on the next video. Thank you.